which will be organized under the theme, The International Experiences of Media Self-Regulation. But before we go to that highlight, I would like to bring all of you to the formality this afternoon, and I wish to bring the host of this event, who is the chairman of the National Press Councils of Thailand, to be upon the stage to deliver his opening remarks. Please give a warm welcome to the chairman of the National Press Councils of Thailand, Mr. Chawarong Limpatthamapani.
Distinguished guests, fellow journalists, academics, and other stakeholders of the National Press Council of Thailand. I also welcome the delegation from the All China Journalists Association, who is the guest of the Thai Journal Association. We welcome the speakers from foreign press councils. So we have the representative from Australia, Sweden, Indonesia, and Myanmar. So you will hear the experience from each press council, including Thailand, in a while. I would like to thank you, the Embassy of Sweden and the Australian embassies for cooperation and bringing our speakers from Australia and Sweden. We also like to thank the Indonesian Press Councils and the Myanmar Press Council for sending their representative and as speakers of this event. As all of you know that the National Press Council of Thailand has been founded in 1997, and today is marked our 20th anniversary. And this is in the crucial time that we are not only facing the problem of the economics and the changing of the media landscape, we also facing the attempt of this military government to issue a law to control the press. They would like to control the self-regulation. However, we are in the process of negotiating and explaining to the government on how the importance of the self-regulation and how the self-regulation can maintain the free press in these democratic countries. So today you will learn from many countries, not only in ASEAN but also in Europe, who has experience in self-regulation, and I hope their experience will give us a good lesson, and then we can use their experience to adapt to our new ways of tightening the self-regulations to maintain the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech for the Thai press. So I hope you will enjoy and learn from these seminars, and wish you all a good day. Thank you very much.
Well, that was the introductory remarks from the chairman of the National Press Council of Thailand, Kun Chawarong Limpatthamapani, who actually gave the account of how important and what is the importance and significance of the media self-regulations. And now I wish to bring all of you to the international seminar under this theme, the international experiences of media self-regulations. And the panelists from today come from various regions in the world, from Northern European countries to Oceania, and of course in Asia as well. And now I wish to invite the panelists upon the stage. And first, I would like to invite the chairman of the Australian Press Council, Professor David Weinberg, to be upon the stage. Please give him a big warm welcome. And also, I would like to invite the Swedish Press Ombudsman, Mr. Ola Sigvardsson. Please give him a big warm welcome. And also today we have an honor that we can host the Vice Chairman of Press Council of Indonesia. And I would like to invite also Mr. Ahmed Johar Chazan to be upon the stage. And also together with us here today as well is the first Vice Chairman of Myanmar Press Council, Mr. Ong Kla Thun. Big round of applause for Mr. Ong Kla Thun as well. And of course, from the host nation today, we have Kun Chavarong Limpatamapani, who is the chairman of the National Press Council of Thailand. And the session will be moderated by Assistant Professor Dr. Pirongrong Ramasud, who is the Vice President of Chulalongkorn University. Please give her a big warm welcome as well. I should have addressed a moderatress rather than moderator. And now the floor is yours, Ajahn Pirongrong, please.
Thank you, Ajahn Wit, for that introduction. Okay, we welcome all to that session, and I think it will be a fascinating session today because we have a wide range of experience from half of the world, as you could see. And I'm debating to myself how I should organize this in terms of the lineup. We have a choice between going by age, by generation, okay? So if we go by age, in terms of not your age, gentlemen, by the age of establishment of each organization. Sweden will go first because Sweden was, the Swedish Press Council was founded in 1916. And second would be Indonesia, actually. Indonesia formally was, the Press Council was founded in 1968, although it didn't become independent until the year 2000, right? And then would be Australia, which was founded in 1976, and then would be Thailand in 1997, and the youngest would be Myanmar, which was founded in the year 2014, 2 years ago. But we won't go by that lineup because we live under a dictatorial regime. So I was dictated by the president here to go by region. So we'll start with Sweden, not because you're oldest, but because my dictator chairman here instructed me to. So we'll start with Sweden, and then we'll go to Australia, and then to Indonesia, and then to Myanmar, and we'll come back to Thailand because we are the host. And that's usually the gesture, the host will go last. Okay, before we go there, let me give a little fair introduction to each of our esteemed guests here. The first, the Swedish Press Ombudsman, Mr. Ola Sigvardsson. Okay, I try my best. Okay, Mr. Ola, let me just use your first name, which is easier, which means hello in Spanish. Anyway, has been the Press Ombudsman of Sweden since April 2011 until today. So that's quite a long-standing position. And he had prior work experience as CEO and editor-in-chief at Oskota Correspondent, which is a Swedish daily newspaper. And also extensive experience in journalism as executive editor, assistant editor, and reporter and editor. Course, and he also received awards from the Swedish for investigative journalism, 2 major Swedish awards in that area. So welcome to Thailand.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and our second speaker, Professor David Weinberg, who regrettably is leaving this position as the chairman of the Australian Press Council, which he has served quite honorably since March of 2015. Before joining the Press Council in 2015, Professor Weinberg was Professor of Law and Honorary Professor of Medicine at the University of Sydney. He has also served as the President of the Australian Law Reform Committee from 1999 to 2009, which was quite extensive, 10 years. He was also in academia, serving as Dean of Law at University of Sydney as well as University of New South Wales in different times, has written several books, written and edited at least 10 books, and if you see his name in the schedule, you wonder why he has this sort of suffix AM at the end of his name, and that was just became clear to me that he was awarded this centenary medal by the Australian government in 2003 for services for law reform, and in 2006 that AM title was earned because he was made a member of the Order of Australia. So that's the AM that explained it, right? So it's for service to the law in the areas of law reform, education, and access to legal service. So an honor is all ours. Next is Mr. Ahmad Johar. Okay, he is the current deputy chairman of the Indonesia Press Council. Mr. Johar has quite a different background. He was an engineer by training, also had a degree in business administration, but he joined the dark side of journalism in 1992, only 1 year after he graduated with a bachelor degree in engineering. He joined Business Indonesia, which is the largest business and economic newspaper in Indonesia, and became a journalist ever since, and rose to several important positions in journalism in Indonesia. And he also was active in a self-regulatory organization in Indonesia, namely Indonesian Journalists Association. And lastly, he was appointed deputy chairman of Indonesian Press Council recently. So welcome. Okay, and another guest, not from afar, Mr. Ong Hatun, who is now vice chairman of the Myanmar Press Council. Mr. Ong Hatun was our correspondent for Reuters News Agency from 1994 to 2016. And he also won the Best Reuters Journalist Award and the Best Story Award in 2007. Also, he was also a founding member and vice chairman of the Foreign Relations, and he was in charge of the Myanmar Journalists Association from 2012 to 2015, and was elected as vice chairman of the first Myanmar Press Council since June 2016. So welcome. And last but not least, we have Kun Chabarong Limpathama Pani, my dictatorial president, chairman of the Press Council of Thailand. His current position is manager and editorial advisor to Thairat Online, and Thairat is, needless to say, is the biggest and widely circulated newspaper in Thailand, and also now embarked upon new venture in other lines of mass media, namely Thairat Online and Thairat TV. And on the TV side, Kun Chabarong is also director of ethical standard and practice at Thairat TV. So I won't bore you anymore. We'll start in the lineup as I mentioned earlier. So we'll start with you, Ola. So Ola is the Press Ombudsman of Sweden, which is the body which works hand in hand with the Press Council of Sweden. And this Press Ombudsman determines whether a complaint should be brought with the Swedish Press Council. So the Press Ombudsman, according to Ola, conversation with me just now, receives at least 500 complaints each year. Okay, so he was the one who determines whether or not that will be brought before the Press Council. Ola, please.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to say I'm very happy that I was invited by the National Press Council of Thailand to attend this very important conference. I'm honored to be here. First of all, I would like to say that the Swedish law stating freedom of the press is very permissive. It's not only permissive, it's also very old. Actually, it was signed by our king and our parliament in 1766. Our Freedom of the Press Act is more than 250 years old and the oldest in the world. We still have it today, updated several times, of course, but to the core is the same legislation as 250 years ago. And if I were to sum up this law in one single sentence, I would say almost everything is allowed. Almost everything is allowed to print in Sweden. There are, of course, restrictions, even in Sweden, but they are few and they are stated within the law. For example, you may not defame individuals. You may not commit hate crimes against minorities in society. And you may not stir up. I mean, that's trying to get your readership to commit crimes. But that's about it. Almost everything is allowed. But then, let's say that you were insulted by a Swedish newspaper. They were writing bad things about you, criticizing you very hard, and perhaps unfair. You could take, naturally, you could take the newspaper to court. You can in Sweden as in most other countries. But that would probably not do you any good. You would probably lose the case. And why then? Why would you lose in court? Because of the same reason. Almost everything is allowed to print. That's why you would lose in court. And this leads me to the existence of the Institute of the Press Ombudsman and the Press Council. In this kind of climate that I'm describing to you, what is the basic idea of the Press Ombudsman and the Press Council? I would describe it like this. By giving individual citizens a chance to get their honor back when they were badly criticized by a newspaper, the news industry hopes that this will reduce the risk of harder legislation when it comes to freedom of the press. So in one word you could say, in one sentence you could say that freedom of the press goes hand in hand with the press handling the freedom in a responsible way. So this is what you might call the ideological background for the existing of the Press Council and the Press Ombudsman. And now I would like to take you through how it is built up. First of all, the most common misunderstanding about being the Press Ombudsman and the Press Council is that they are authorities, regulated by the government, financed by the state. They are not. They are a total independent system, and we have no support from the government. We have no support by law for what we are doing. We have no money from society whatsoever. We are a totally independent body. We don't even have contact, actually, with the government. We work separately. But even the most independent system must have a structure. And our structure is called the Committee for Media Cooperation. And this committee consists of 4 organizations, representatives of 4 organizations. It's the Newspaper Publishers Association of Sweden, it's the Journalists Union, it's the Magazine Publishers Association of Sweden, and it's the National Press Club. Together they are the board of the press ethical system. And what do they do then? First of all, they give instructions. They give instruction to me, what I can do, and most perhaps what I cannot do. And they also give instruction to the press council about their work. And they also, this committee also owns the press, the code of ethics. The code of ethics that the whole press, the whole media actually are to obey. They can change it whenever they please. The code was first written in 1923 and has been changed many times since then. Last time roughly 10 years ago. But they do one more important thing, this Committee for Media Cooperation. They fund us. All the money that we use in our budget comes from the Committee of Media Cooperation for these organizations. And we have a budget of roughly $600,000 a year, which they provide for us. So basically, this is the structure of our system. It's an independent system run by a network that sets the rules and pays the bills. It's as simple as that. Well, then who do we try? What kind of publications do we try? First of all, we try all printed papers and magazines. You can file complaints about all that's printed on paper. And we also try web pages and accounts in social media that are connected to the Newspaper Publishers Association and the Magazine Publishers Association, the magazines and newspapers that are part of those organizations. And we also try online newspaper who willingly asked to be members of our press ethical system. Up to now, since 2011, when this system was opened, we have had 38 online newspaper applying for membership. And it's going more and more rapidly, I'm happy to say. And why do they want to be part of this system where they can be criticized publicly? Well, the reason is they want to be set apart from those dark sides of the net where you can find hate speech and other bad things. They would use the membership in the press ethical system as a mark of quality towards their readers. And then, what do we try? First of all, we try defamation of individuals. That is our main objective. I mean, 95% of what I do is trying complaints that concerns defamation of individuals. When it comes to companies, authorities, organizations, football clubs, whatsoever, legal entities of different kinds, we don't try them for defamation. According to Swedish law and to the press ethical praxis, you cannot defame a legal entity. You cannot defame an authority. You cannot defame a congregation. You cannot defame a football club. But if they are treated badly by a newspaper, they have a right to reply. And if the newspaper denies them this right to reply, we can criticize them. Then what can we not try? First of all, you must be personally involved. You cannot file complaints by my office on someone else's behalf. And the second thing is that we don't try correctness, which might amaze some people. But the reason for that is that the truth of what is correct, it's very hard to detect. I mean, what is fake news? I mean, very often it's up to your perspective, your personal perspective, what you think in life or what your political opinions are, and so on and so forth. So therefore, our board has decided we shall not try cases that just is about correctness. But if a lie hurt an individual person, we will try the damage done to the individual. We'll try the damage, not the lie itself. It's complicated, but that's the way we do it. The Code of Ethics is a very short one. Actually, it's 17 paragraphs divided into 6 short chapters. And I will just give you the headlines to give you a taste of what the code is about. Provide accurate news. Treat replies generously. Respect individual privacy. Exercise care in the use of pictures. Listen to each party. And last but not least, be cautious in publishing names. It's the story that is important sometimes, not the names. So this is the core of the Code of Ethics. Okay, now let's say someone has filed a complaint. And I have recommended the Press Council to criticize the newspaper, and the Press Council does so. What then happens? What's the punishment, or what will the decision in the Press Council lead to? The newspaper, they have to publish the whole decision. It could be very long, actually, stating that they did wrong to the complainant. And that is something that the complainant always can have with him in the life, in further life. And we also put this decision on our webpage, on our open archive, where it can be found by anyone forever, hopefully. And we also send the decision to all news agencies in Sweden, so that all other newspapers that are interested to report on the decision, on the criticism against the newspaper, can do so. And this often leads to a very massive publicity. And in this publicity lies the redress of the complainant. So, I would like to conclude my presentation by giving you a few examples of articles that were complained on at my office, and to give you an idea of how we work. First of all, is it okay to expose an anonymous person who writes hateful comments on the internet? Have you ever heard about that before? This is an article published by the newspaper Expressen a few years back. They had found a way for a short period of time to identify thousands, many thousands of people who were writing anonymous hate comments on the internet. Mostly the hate comments were hate against migrants coming to Sweden and Muslims, which is a very hot topic in Sweden. So, first they published a story about a lot of politicians who had written hate comments, and they had to leave their positions, all of them, and that was not a big debate in Sweden. But the second day, they published this. You can see this is 4 private citizens, and the person who was in the very light was this one called Jim Olson. He was a professor, retired professor at a technical university in Gothenburg, Sweden, and he had written 5,000 hateful comments on the internet. 5,000. I mean, he's working hard. 5,000 hateful comments on the internet anonymously. And Expressen revealed his identity and published it. And he was very angry, I can tell you that. Here you can see the reporter to the right, the day before this article was published, confronting him in his home. And he was very angry already then. After this was published, he filed a complaint by my office. He meant that his privacy was invaded when they published his name, when he did not want it. He wanted to be anonymous. He meant that he had the right to be anonymous on the net. And this was, of course, a very complicated issue to take on. But after considerable consideration, I decided to free the newspaper. And my reasons for that was, when you go out on a public arena, and a comment field on the internet is a public arena. When you go out on a public arena with strong political issues and opinions, you have to accept that other people tell the audience who stands behind those opinions. When it's about things of common interest, not private things, of course, but migration and how you perceive religion, that are things that are of common interest. And in such situation, it is okay to reveal even anonymous people. And when he got my decision that I freed the newspaper, he was so angry. I mean, he wrote letters and he appeared in TV shows and on internet shows and so on and so forth. And he appealed, which you can do, to the press council. And asked our press council, please do not decide like the stupid press ombudsman. Please punish the newspaper for what they did to me. But the press council decided, all in all, every one of them decided to go the same way as I. So the newspaper was freed. The second and last example that I want to show you is it okay to reveal the name of a celebrity taking drugs? See, it's the same newspaper, Expressen. They are hot. And this person here, who's taking cocaine, right there, he is one of the most famous people in Sweden. He's an actor and has been acting on our national scene for decades. And he has made so many films, both Swedish films and international films. He even had a little role in the Hobbit film. That's how big he is. Really. Michael Persbrandt. And in this case, he had been on a nightclub and he got drunk and somebody took him to a smaller room and there they started to use cocaine. And what he didn't realize was that he was photographed. And sometime later, the photographer sold the picture to Expressen, who published this. Michael Persbrandt filed a complaint by my office. He, like the former person here, thought that his privacy was invaded by this. The newspaper said, oh, no, no, no. Michael Persbrandt, he is a public figure. He's a public person. He must accept to be scrutinized like this. I decided, after thinking a lot about what to do, to criticize the newspaper. And my reason for that is, of course, Michael Persbrandt, as famous as he is a public figure. But there are different kinds of public figures. On one hand, you have politicians, civil servants, judges, high-ranking militaries, CEOs of big companies, so on and so forth. They are carriers of society. They have to stand responsible to us when they do something very bad. But the other kind of public figure is those who appear on an open arena. We know about them. We are interested in them. But when the sun goes down, they are not carriers of society. They are entertainers. They are artists, they are singers, they are TV celebrities, so on and so forth. Football players, typical example. They are not carriers of society. They are entertainers. And being just entertainers, we have no responsibility to ask from them when they fail in any way. So they have the right to a strong protection of their private life. So I decided to criticize the newspaper. I sent the case to the press council, and the press council decided the same way as I. I'm giving you these two examples to show you the complexity of press ethics, media ethics. First, we have a private person, a retired professor, who wants to write anonymously about on politics. It can, under certain circumstances, be okay to reveal his identity, even though he does not want it. On the other hand, we have one of the most famous celebrities in Sweden, and he has the right to protection under certain circumstances to his private life. So, welcome to the complex world of media ethics. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that marvelous presentation. And it is indeed a complex world, but you have actually simplified it with all these keywords: the right to reply, independence, publicity by redressing the complaints, and also the actual empirical examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next, we're moving to Australia. Professor Weinberg, I trust you have a little presentation to share with us.
Thank you very much, Sawadi, and thank you so much to the National Press Council of Thailand and to the Australian Embassy in Bangkok for inviting me here to speak. It's a great honor, and I'm very proud to be here for your 20th birthday. I know from my experience it's not easy to last that long. ULA has it on all of us. But most of the press councils in the world are in their infancy, and many doctors would not give them a great prognosis for living to be teenagers or adults. But I think those of us who work very hard at it can make a long-lasting impression. So this is a new banner, and it reflects this. The first time we've used it at the Australian Press Council, and the one we had for 40 years. Prior to this, we're 41 years old now, just entering middle age. And we always had rolls of newspapers, and that represented the Australian Press Council. But now almost no one accesses, more than 70% of Australians access their news via social media. So they're using their tablets, computer screen, telephone, and so on. We still have the newspapers there almost for historical reference, but we are moving with the times, and we recognize that we have to be vital players in the electronic domain, the digital domain. And increasingly we're recruiting our members from the online-only community. So we have 900 members. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And of those, most of them are traditional publishers that produce newspapers and magazines, but they all have websites. They all publish via Facebook as well. And then we have the growing population now, the last 20 or 30 members are online only. And they include many international publishers. So Huffington Post, Australia, is a member. Daily Mail online is a member. We're talking to the New York Times, Australian edition. So it's a changing face. It's a more digital and a more globalized membership. Point the right way. Okay. So that's our website, just to let you know. If you want to go on there and have a play, you'll get more information than you will just from my few minutes on the stage. But you can see the critical thing there is make a complaint. Almost all of our again, a generation ago, people read a news story, they got upset, and they wrote us a letter. Now, almost everyone goes on the website, and we take them through step by step how to make a complaint. We explain our standards and principles, we explain our privacy policy, and then we ask them to tell us what the problem is. We also have our latest adjudication. So these are the decisions in the trickiest cases, the kind of ones that Ula was just talking about, where we not only want the individual publisher to understand that they may or may not have done something wrong, but we want it to serve as an education for the whole industry. So we also widely publicize our adjudications, and many of them are discussed internationally because they're novel, they're interesting, they have interesting facts, they have raised new issues that haven't previously been dealt with in the realm of media ethics. So who are we? We are also a purely private self-regulatory body. There is no statute in Australia that regulates the press. If you're a radio or TV broadcaster, and you require a license, there is a different system. But if you're in newspapers, magazines, or online news production, then there is no formal government regulation. And in fact, I'd make the point, because I know this is being discussed in Thailand at the moment, if you go to the World Press Freedom Index and look at 1 through 180, number 1, best in the world is Finland. For some reason, I would have guessed Sweden, but Finland is number 1. Sweden must be very close to that as well. 180 is North Korea. You don't want to be in that territory. But if you look at the top 50 or 60, none of them have public government regulators. So I think there's an important lesson to be learned from that. If you look at us, we have 2 key moments in our history. In 1976, the Australian government established the regulator, the formal regulator that governs radio and television, and then they left open the question, what should we do about newspapers? No online at that time, but newspapers and magazines. And the threat of that, there was a suggestion that maybe we should have a public regulator for that as well, government regulator. And all of the newspapers that had been at war with each other for years, hated each other, they found a common enemy, which was government regulation, and they got together and said, no, we'll self-regulate, we'll do a good job, give us some time, and down the track, if you think we're not doing a good job, we'll talk again, but let us try to do it ourselves. So we were founded in 1976. We're an incorporated association. There's no statute. Our members are bound by our Constitution, and that says they will follow our standards of practice, our ethical rules, and they will cooperate with our processes, the processes of complaints handling. We have no legislative basis, no statutory powers at all. There are some statutory benefits to being a member of the Press Council. For example, journalists that are organizations that are members of the Press Council get certain exemptions under the Privacy Act. Because a normal corporation couldn't collect information about individuals, keep it secret, not let people know. But journalists need to do that as an inherent part of their work. So the government says, if you're a member of the Press Council, we will exempt you from the normal privacy laws. We don't get any government funding. Not a penny, we never have. And I think if I suggested it, most of our members would resign. They're so strongly opposed to having government influence in the organization. In 2012, the government again, so 40-odd years, 30-odd years after the original introduction of the Press Council, the government also talked about, well, maybe we need better regulation, maybe we need a government regulator. We hear the Australian Press Council doesn't have enough powers, it doesn't have enough funds to do the job properly. Well, that again galvanized all of the newspapers, and they said, okay, we can do it ourselves, we'll do it better, we'll increase our funds to the Press Council quite significantly to give them more resources. At that time, there was one administrator in the Press Council. Now there are 10. So it gives you an example of the extra money we got. And they also guaranteed the Press Council more independence. So the complaints handling is now completely arm's length. No publisher is involved in the vetting of complaints or in the determination of complaints. It's purely done by our professional staff. So again, the government backed off and said, okay, that's fine, that's what we wanted to hear. So I'll give you my conclusions first before I provide a bit more detail, just in case I run out of time. But the essence of this conference today is about, does self-regulation work? How do I assess it? Well, based on my experience of looking at how it works in Australia and also in neighboring countries, in New Zealand, in Europe, my view is that it strongly enhances press freedom and free speech. And again, if you look at those top 50, 60 countries in the World Press Freedom Index, all of them have self-regulation. It's cheaper, faster, and more flexible. So when I look, I speak regularly with my colleagues that do regulation of radio and television. We want to make sure we're keeping consistent approaches. Sometimes we get complaints that should go to them, and they get complaints that should come to us. So we have a very cooperative, collegial, communicative relationship. But when I look at how they operate, it's lawyers, lawyers, more lawyers, and more lawyers. Because they have statutory powers, because they can fine radio and television stations, because they can remove a license, which is like the death penalty for a broadcaster, and because they can place conditions on a license, as soon as a complaint is made, they're in there with their lawyers. And a dispute that we would take a month, 2 months to resolve at zero cost to the complainant or the government will cost millions of dollars and take years and years. So on the one hand, it seems attractive to have more powers, but when you have more powers, then you're also going to be in the courts most of the time. In 41 years, not one of our matters has resulted in a court case. So the courts have been willing to say, you do that well, it's alternative dispute resolution, it's consensual, both sides have agreed to the outcome and abide by it. So keep on going. So it's quicker, faster, cheaper, more personal. Complainants get to come in and talk to us directly. They don't do it through their team of lawyers. The system really, in order to be effective, relies on professional pride, on peer review, on a sense of a shared enterprise, and on a cooperative approach. So we don't operate with a fear of punishment. The most we can do is very similar to Sweden, is to require the newspaper or the online site to publish our determination, which says these facts were found to be inaccurate, or this was unethical in terms of breaching privacy or being too offensive, racially offensive. So that's it. But newspapers, editors, publishers, online editors hate that kind of finding because it says this organization has behaved unethically. It's fallen below the standards. And of course, no publisher wants to have that said about them. They don't want their readers to see that. They don't want their advertisers to see that. So there's a strong element of professional pride that motivates good behavior, and I think it motivates better behavior probably than using punishment. Because with punishment, they bring in the lawyers. And again, it's not, I'm a lawyer, I don't hate lawyers, but I think lawyers have no role in this system. One problem we have on the other side, so those are all the reasons I think self-regulation is the best way to go, and I still think that. One small problem we have in Australia is that there's no compulsion to join the Press Council. So you get some media organizations that I've unflatteringly described as freeloaders. So they're happy for all the other publishers to pay the fees and to do the work and to provide education for their staff, and they simply ride through with no fear of government regulation because all the others are carrying it. Now, there aren't that many. We have 900 members of the Press Council, 95% of print circulation, and 17 of the top 20 online news sites are members. But again, they do that as a matter of conscience or professional pride, or a view that it is a shared enterprise. They're all in it together. Most of all, they probably do it because they don't want government to do it. So they feel it's their role to make sure the system works effectively. Some countries like the UK and New Zealand offer incentives, tax incentives, or legal defenses that are available in defamation or privacy actions to try to encourage more publishers into the fold. And I'm talking with the Australian government at the moment about possibly having those incentives, not a stick, but carrots, incentives for publishers to join, including small publishers. The only real downside I could say at the moment in Australia is that there's no sanction for a rogue publisher. If you get a publisher that's not a member of the Press Council and doesn't want to cooperate and won't publish our determinations, there's no sanction for that now. Now, fortunately, there are very, very few of those, but it can happen, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. There should be some stronger mechanism to encourage them into the self-regulatory system. Okay. So you can roll it all the way down. So there are, as I said, there are 900 publications that are part of the Australian Press Council. They cover 95% of newspaper circulation and 100% of magazine circulation, and most of the major online publishers. They have a very attractive chair, and roll it down further. Take them all down. Oh, sorry. So the overall council has 900 mastheads on it. The council, the governing council, is a mix of their chair, 10 publisher representatives, or 9 in the union is represented, and then we have 10 public members who are retired headmasters, educators, social workers, lawyers, and so on. So they're meant to bring the common sense of the community into the dispute resolution process. And then we have 4 retired journalists who are meant to understand the nitty-gritty, what's involved in producing a story, what are the pressures, what lengths, what steps are required to make sure you got it right, when do you publish and correct, or when do you keep working on it until you're 100% certain it's correct. We can move on to the next one. Roll it, roll it, roll it. Okay. An issue for us in Australia, when I arrived at the Press Council and I was giving speeches saying we have 900 members, I said, do we really know that? Can we do an audit and check? Because I was sure some enterprising reporter would catch me out on telling a lie. So we did an audit. Actually, we were saying we had 800 members at that time. We found we were under-exaggerating. We actually had more like 900, but we hadn't updated it. But the one striking thing was that it was really old Australia. It was white people with white hair. We had no membership from the thriving multicultural community. Australia is a heavily multicultural country, and there is a major Chinese language press. There are 4 Chinese language dailies in Sydney alone, and there are probably 10 altogether in Australia. There's a very large Arabic press, there's Thai press, Greek, Italian, Vietnamese, Bengali, Hindi, and none of them were members of the Press Council. So I started going around. That was the first meeting we had. I'm sitting next to an old friend of mine who was the first Chinese Australian member of Parliament. So I approached her and I said, what's going on? How can we get people? And she said, no one ever asked us. We didn't think we were part of that. And I said, well, we're asking you now. So we got together all of the leading editors of Chinese language publications now. Several of them are members, several of them more have applied. We've done the same thing with the Filipino language community, with the Bangladeshi language community, and so on. So we're steadily making sure that the Press Council reflects modern Australia. We also, to my shock, had no Indigenous publishers in the Press Council, none. There is about 3% of the population of Australia are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders, the original inhabitants of Australia. There are some outstanding newspapers, including the Koori Times, the Land Rights News, and so on. None of them were members. We went and approached them, and now we have 3 members right away from the Indigenous community, and there are others that are talking to us about joining. So we're trying to, again, we self-regulate, but we're trying to be inclusive of the whole population, not just the majority population or the old population. Again. Okay, this is our relatively recent strategic plan, and what we do, it can be divided very quickly into 3 areas. We make standards that the press have to abide by. All our members are bound by our Constitution to follow the rules, the general principles and the standards. Then we handle complaints. And finally, we are advocates for free speech and free press. So I am out there. I'm, again, a lawyer by training. I was head of the Law Reform Commission for 10 years. It's natural for me to be looking at legislation every day and say, does this infringe journalists' ability to produce good investigative journalism? Does the privacy law intrude into reporting? Does the anti-terrorism law intrude into good reporting? Are there enough protections for whistleblowers that people will come forward and give information to newspapers that reveal bad practice or even corrupt practice? So we have those 3 main headings. Okay, we get complaints about 700 a year. We just had our June 30 cutoff, and we were looking at having 720 complaints in the last financial year. The main difference in recent years, the complaints have been going up by about 10 or 15% a year, but the big difference now is that social media drives the number of people who complain. So we have 700 complaints about articles, but there are about 4,000 people involved in making those complaints. So the individual who reads a story that is upset no longer just writes to us. They tweet, they put it on Facebook, they say to all their friends, hey, this is awful. Let's all complain to the Australian Press Council. Here's the link. So we're dealing with a much larger number of complainants than we used to. We first look to get a remedy. So if we think the person has been harmed, there's been a falsehood about them, the article says they have a criminal background, and the person can prove to us that that's simply not true, we ring the editor, and 99 times out of 100, the editors will make a correction. They'll apologize if necessary. They'll correct the online material and so on. So that's probably what we do best. In a very small number of cases, only 40 out of those 700, we have to have a mini trial that leads to an adjudication, and that's the one that must be published by the member. Take it up. Okay, I won't spend any time on this, but we have also, as Ula mentioned, they're very simple general principles. We have 8, the 2 in each of 4 categories. You would guess them, everybody in this room could guess them if I asked you, so you have to be accurate, you have to be fair, balanced, you have to give a right of reply, you should disclose conflicts of interest, you shouldn't breach privacy unless it's in the public interest, you shouldn't be offensive or cause distress unless it's in the public interest. So they're very easy to state. They're much trickier to apply when you get complicated fact situations. Okay, and I won't go into it, but we've looked at a few other recent ones. We looked at our complaints experience and where there seemed to be common problems. One of them was coverage of suicide, and doctors, psychologists, welfare groups, mental health associations are saying newspapers are providing too much information, and then we're seeing copycat suicide. So let's tone it down. Let's not make it look glamorous. We had a rash of cases in which reporters were disturbing patients in hospital. So we have a special guideline on that too. I can roll it. So we have the standards that have to be followed, and then we also try to be educative, to say to reporters, here's how to do it better so you won't get a complaint against you. And here are some that we looked at recently: reporting around election time, obviously a very sore point with many people. Digital alteration of images. It used to be a photograph was a photograph. Now it's not. We had a famous example of that where one of our leading news magazines had a big front page picture of one of the leading politicians addressing a huge crowd naked. And of course he wasn't naked in real life. He was wearing a suit and tie, but they digitally altered the photo, not to embarrass him, although he was not happy about that, but to show, can you now just, can you believe your eyes? Now that digital alteration is so easy, can you believe what you see? Is it real or is it fake news? So, and then at the moment we're looking at a few other issues, including reporting on transgender people. We've received a rash of complaints about that. Next. Okay, there, you can go past that one. Can go past that one too. Just looking at the things that are complained about. I'm happy for these slides to be made available to you through the NPCT, so you can look at them in more detail later, but these are the things that people are complaining about. So it's still mostly about accuracy, but there's an increase in ones about causing prejudice or discrimination or distress. Next one. And then the outcome of the complaints, most of them are declined because most of them, our interest, as Ula also mentioned, is in freedom of the press. So people will say, I hated that article. It doesn't reflect my view of global warming or politics or sport or whatever. You say, well, it's too bad. It's fair enough. It doesn't breach any standards. We have to have diversity and we have to have as free expression as possible. It's only that small proportion of cases where we actually take it to an adjudication, a hearing. And in about 3/4 of those, we find against the newspaper. In other words, we uphold the complaint. Okay, and I mentioned earlier that a lot of our time is spent advocating for press freedom. So we look at all the legislation, analyze it to see if it overly intrudes into freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, the ability to do investigative journalism. Okay, and here are some ways I'll end on this note. Sorry for taking so long. How can we help each other in this difficult field? Well, I think we can do lots more sharing of education and training. There's no reason we shouldn't be sending our staff to spend some time at other institutions in the region or elsewhere and provide that kind of training. We should be sharing experience of what works and, importantly, what doesn't work. We have handbooks. We produce the materials that are used in universities to teach journalism students. We can share that sort of thing as well. So we can share education, information, and IT. We've now got a very sophisticated IT system to track complaints, to make sure that they don't fall between the cracks, that they're dealt with quickly, and also that we can learn from the experience, and we can see what messages we can send out to the industry to say, we're getting a lot of complaints about this. Think about how you might want to handle this better. Okay, and please keep in touch with us. That's my 2IC, John Pender, the Executive Director, and we will never fail to answer an email or a call if you want to make contact. So I hope you'll take advantage of that offer. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Weinberg, for that highly impressive track record in terms of structure, process, principle, as well as participation. 700 complaints. That's quite something. I hope Kunchawarong will reach that in 20 years. They are 41 years old and they are receiving 700. We will get to that maybe in 2 decades. Before we go for a break, I have a question. If no one else? Anybody else has a question first? If not, I have my own personal question. Okay, I have a question. In your presentation, Ola, you talked about publishing pictures with care. And usually when we think of pictures, we think of factual pictures, actual pictures of events that took place. But I remember there was an incident in Europe which seemed to have this tradition of parody. And there are cartoons and caricatures. And actually this didn't take place in Sweden. It took place in Denmark. In Denmark, there was a series of caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad published in this Danish newspaper, Jyllands-Posten. That was in 2015, and that's sort of created an international uproar against Denmark and journalism. Western journalism was branded. So my question is to Ola as well as to you, Professor Weinberg. Do you take how do you, on the one hand, you could see these caricatures and parody, satire as you like, as freedom of expression, but on the other hand, from the other side, people could also perceive it as hate speech, hate comments. How does the Press Ombudsman and the Press Council tackle this issue?
Yes, actually, when these pictures, these satire pictures were published, out of battery. Yeah, this one. When I go easy on your ears now. When they were published, let's say 10 years ago, I was actually editor-in-chief of a daily newspaper in Sweden, and I also had the choice to publish them or not. I regarded the cartoons as part of freedom of the press, freedom of utterance. I mean, I think it was totally okay to publish them. No problem with doing that, but you don't have to publish them. I mean, it's up. Freedom of the press is not that you must publish something that someone else wants to publish. So I said no. So my newspaper at that time did not publish those pictures because I thought they were offensive, and that was my choice in the situation. Had I been the press ombudsman at the time and got a complaint against the publishing of those caricatures over Muhammad, I would have dismissed it. because, as I told you when I talked earlier, we work with defamation of individuals, and we don't take up general matters like that. And there were no identifiable individuals but Muhammad in these pictures, so we would have dismissed it.
No Australian newspaper or magazine published those particular photos either, so they all made a conscious decision that, balancing the value of them as against the distress they would cause. So they made the same kind of balance that we would have had to make at the Press Council, but because no one published them, we didn't have any complaints about them. We try to give great weight to opinion, we give even more weight to satire, and we give even more weight probably to political cartoons. So I can only think of one cartoon that's been found to breach the standards in Australia in the last 10 or 15 years. We sometimes get difficult ones. So you might remember, maybe it was a year or more ago, the young 3-year-old boy from Syria, Ayaan Kurti, who drowned trying to flee a terrible situation, he and his family trying to flee a terrible situation. And there were 2 photos that whipped around the world. One of them was a little boy face down in the ocean, very distressing. The other one was a policeman who had picked him up and was cradling him and carrying him. No Australian newspaper, although you could find them on the internet, no Australian newspaper published the boy in the, obviously drowned. A number of them published the one in which you couldn't see his face and so on, but he was being held by a police officer. So we did receive complaints about the publication of that one, and we had long discussions in our office, and we decided it was a bit like the picture of the young woman in Vietnam who was fleeing after her village had been napalmed, that it was such an important photo historically that it was something that people should see and talk about to understand the horrors of war. And so it was that kind of iconic photo, and we did not pursue any complaints in that area. But they're very difficult. Had they published the picture of him in the ocean alone, I think we might have said, you had a choice of photos, why did you do the most distressing one? But we didn't have to reach that conclusion because, again, the Australian papers themselves chose to go with the less distressing image.
Thank you. Yes, question, please.
Just a quick question to Professor Weinberg. 3 years ago, there is a big news story that the DJ from Australia radio station ring the hospital in London and pretend themselves that they are is a call from Queen Elizabeth and asking about the sickness of the Prince of the Countess of Cambridge. That case, bring the nurse who answered the phone call, commit suicide, kill herself. What did the press, the Australian Press Complaint Council did with that to DJ? I know that I heard that the radio station have fined them, but later they returned to work at that station. What the press complaints, what the press council did with these 2 DJ, please, thank you.
Yeah, it was a terrible case, and we were not involved because, again, radio and television are dealt with by our formal government regulator, the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA. And as you said correctly, they did an investigation. They found that the 2 had failed in their duty to maintain standards, and the station had failed. And so they fined, it's quite a large amount of money, but that was all they did, was issue a fine. There was a lot of public discussion about that, and many people thought that they had been that the punishment was insufficient given the dramatic events that followed, and given there was no public interest in this stupidity. It was not investigative journalism. It was not any, it was just it was meant to be a joke, but it backfired in a terrifying way. So I think that discussion was helpful in the community. It led to us, even though it was a radio station involved, we thought, well, we should review our own approach to these things, and we did develop quite strong rules that prevent journalists from approaching patients in hospital, and that includes people who are, say, in a drug addiction rehabilitation program. And we've had we've had maybe one complaint in that area since we brought in these new rules. Similarly, we get much better reporting around suicide. So journalists are following what we advise in those areas. And, they're learning from some bad behavior previously, but at least it gives an opportunity for a community discussion and improved performance later. The only case we've had on approaching people in hospital is a complicated case, but in relation to a member of Parliament's son who is in a drug rehabilitation program, and it was actually his mother who made a big deal of it in the Parliament. And so some newspapers obviously wanted to go and search out the son, and one of them did, but then there was no complaint made about it. But as you say, sometimes we learn from negative examples as well as positive ones, and I think that's one which is the parties do it. We're not punished sufficiently, in my view, but I think it's led to a major change of behavior. I think journalists have looked at that and said it's not a joke. It's got to be treated very seriously.
Thank you. Any other question? If not, oh yes, I'm sorry.
I want to question whether the self-regulation itself got questioned in your countries, like in Thailand is the case that the public member do not really side with the media or the press freedom when it comes to self-regulation, and the thing that self-regulation in Thailand is a failure, and so they actually are the people that call for the government to regulate the media, and when you got questioned, how do you deal with that?
Does that question apply to your case?
I mean, I think you can only argue when you hear things like that. And we are actually, David and me, the persons I know here in this panel, we're here as a living proof that self-regulation works. I mean, we have had it for more than 100 years, and we have not had any practical reductions of the freedom of the press during that period. And I think there is a very strong consensus within the Swedish society, politicians, the public, and in the media industry, that self-regulation actually is a very powerful tool to build a more ethical consciousness among the media industry. So I think you must just put up front positive examples.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I point to a few different bits of evidence. Again, if you look at the World Press Freedom Index and all of the countries that are up at the good end of it, that have a lot of freedom of the press, a lot of free speech, a lot of public debate about issues, rather than the discussion festering underground, they all are self-regulatory systems. In Australia, our complaints, as I showed before, going up by 10 or 15% a year, and the number of complainants has gone up by 800% in 3 years. So it seems to be an indicator that the public are using the system. They're willing to complain, and I always say that's a critical part of the system. It's not just for journalists and editors, not just for the press council, but if members of the public want it to work, they have to be involved as well and take the time and the 15-20 minutes of trouble in order to fill out the forms and make sure that they bring these things to our attention. We get criticism, especially on Twitter, which I sometimes hesitate to open my Twitter because it's full of people saying, "Oh, terrible! Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they sack that journalist?" I can't sack journalists. Why didn't they take away that newspaper's right to publish? I can't do that. Why didn't they fine them? I can't do that. And so, but when you get in a public forum like this and people say the same thing, I say, well, would you rather have a government regulator? Yes. And who will appoint the people on the regulator? The government. Oh, no, I don't want that. So I don't think people think through the where it might go, and they don't want government control over freedom of the press. So if people give me ideas about how we can improve our process, fantastic. But they very rarely do. Usually the criticism is of that kind of very vague and general sense, and you say, well, how can we fix it? We don't get many suggestions.
One more thing. I think David's idea with looking at this international list is a very good one, but I think you can take it one more step. I mean, you have the list of freedom of the press, and all the best have self-regulatory systems. But compare that list to the list from Transparency International, who are measuring the level of corruption in all countries all over the world. And you can see the 51st there are the same. So if you are really, really, really want to get rid of corruption, let the press free.
Thank you very much. I think we'll break for 15 minutes, and we should be back here around 3:15.